Hi, welcome to Recovery His Way. I'm Stuart Whiting here on the campus of His Way in Huntsville, Alabama, joined again by our director, Tom. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Stuart. Good to be with you.
And we want to continue in our discussion about our mission statement. And so why don't we go ahead and read that again, share that with our listeners.
Right. I appreciate the fact that it's been a good refresher for me just to go through this mission statement, being reminded again about why, what's driving what we do every day. Because sometimes you get so busy doing it, you can forget what it is, what the why is behind it. So, our mission statement says, reclaim men from a life of addiction, rebuild their lives in spiritual sobriety in Christ, and restore them to Christ-like service in the community.
So last week, we began the third part of this in talking about what it means to have Christ-like service in the community. Right. And I want to just touch on this word restore. When I hear that, I tend to think of something that's already been in a particular position and now is no longer there, so we're going to restore that back. But that doesn't really encompass the whole idea here. So why don't you share with us why restore is the word?
Right. I think restore is an important word because part of the spiritual process is restoring things to the way God intended them, not necessarily the way that they have been in the past. So it's God's intention we're accomplishing. Sobriety is about God's intention. So in this process of reclaiming men and rebuilding them, restoring them, helping discover the purpose that God has for them, and then helping them find their place in that becomes critical to the process. If you remember in 1 Corinthians 12, as Paul talks about the body, he says that God places each part exactly where he intends it, right, for a purpose. So God has a purposefulness and intentionality to our lives that for addicts, they've never really discovered if they don't understand the spiritual perspective, and they haven't really pursued. And so helping them to pursue that, helping them to find that really is what it's about helping them find that place of service in the community. And I think in the community is an important concept too, because most addicts feel disenfranchised by the community. They don't feel like they're a part of the community. If anything, they feel rejected by the community. They feel turned away from by the community. They feel less than the community, like the community wouldn't want them. Right. The community wants to dismiss them or throw them away or something like that. And so a part of this restoration of really helping them discover a role in the community becomes an important thing, that they have value obviously in the eyes of God, but even within the value within the eyes of the community. I mean, so many of our guys, even the idea that they have relationships with people who are respected in the community, right. Because they've typically not. They've typically, been outside looking in, if you will. I remember one time we were taking him to the dentist, and he was commenting to the fact that the last time he was ever at a dentist office, he was drunk in the parking lot, and they were shooing him away. And now he's walking into the dentist, being greeted by the receptionist, and has a place in the community. And I think that's such a identity transforming type of experience that's so important in this recovery process.
Yeah, you just made me think of a great theme in the Bible, and a passage that is in the Old Testament and shows up in the New Testament also, that once you were a people far away and now you are a people brought near. And so God's relationship is always in this idea of community and coming together. And, last week you shared with us the story from John 13 in Jesus, who he knows who he is, he knows what his purpose is, and now he serves his community in a way that's shocking. So much so that Peter was like, no, you can't be the one to do this. Right. And of course, well, if I don't do this for you, Peter, then you can't have any part of me. And so it's like, oh, well, then wash all of me. Right. Peter is it's a great reflection of all of us, right, being kind of uncertain what's happening. And so that idea of having identity and having a purpose and being in community, and one thing that's been important in my Bible study in the last few years has been recognizing the importance of the early stories in Genesis. And all of that's on page 1 of our Bible, that God creates us in his image and gives us identity, and that he gives us community. We're in relationship right away with him and with others. And then he gives us a purpose to be a part of his kingdom and have rule over part of it, whatever exactly that means in each life. And I think missing that purpose then we are not going to be complete. And so I love this idea of restoring that concept for those maybe who have never heard it, and how important it is. You also use a word sometimes with restore, that you use restocking. So how does that play into this?
Well, I mean, I think of a shelf, and kind of it gets depleted and gets restocked. That there's a role to be filled, that there's a place to be taken, and it's a matter of being put back in place. It's a matter of being put back into that spot in their lives. I was thinking about the passage I had in front of me here in Galatians 5. In Galatians 5:13 says, "For you were called to freedom," and that's an important message. You were called to freedom. I mean, every guy that walks on our campus, it's in bondage. They're in chains. They're in shackles. So how do they discover freedom? That's important. We live in a nation. We're getting ready to go through the election process again and be reminded again about this freedom that we have in this nation that we cherish. So freedom is an important value. It's an important value to God. He intended us to be free. And so all these guys are out of place because they're out of freedom, right? They're in bondage. They're in shackles. They're in a prison of their own making many times. And so he says, you were called to freedom. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh. So the first tendency in our flesh is to take those freedoms and use them self-servingly, use them to, simply fulfill ourselves, gratify ourselves, and those kind of things.
You see that very much in the teenage years, when a teenager gets a little bit of freedom out from under the parents, maybe gets a car, or at least can go out on their own. And boy, sometimes a lot of horrible things happen in that because there's
and so then he follows that up with, but instead that freedom is given so that through love we serve one another, and so that purposes the freedom that gives me. So the teenager now gets the car so she can run errands for her mom, or she can take her little brother to school, or whatever those things are, become the way that I channel that newfound freedom in a way that serves one another. And I think that's an important part of what we're trying to do with the guys here, is really, as they're experiencing this newfound freedom, how do they channel it into a way that becomes a blessing to others and find their real restocked restored self in this role of service. I was having a great conversation with a young man last night, and he's been here about 9 months, so he's in our advanced recovery group, and doing the second 6 months, and he's stepped up to a number of service opportunities, which has been great. But he was concerned. He was like, okay, where am I going to go from here? Everything's going well, but 3 months from now, I'm going to finish this, and what's going to happen to me? And we talked, and he was concerned. He would love to be more involved here. And I told him, everybody who is involved here is here because in that freedom, they learned how to serve, and then they simply kept fulfilling that. And then we kept finding more and more needs, more and more opportunities, and they were discovering more ways that they could serve. So they end up creating some kind of part-time or even at some point a full-time position. Virtually almost all of our residential staff are resident guys who went through the program. Many of them never left because they stayed and they kept finding places. They were driving here, teaching a class here, overseeing the house at certain times, and they find a role there of service. And so, and that's a great blessing, because when you wake up in the morning, there's no greater curse to me than waking up in the morning thinking about me. But if I can wake up in the morning thinking about the Lord and thinking about serving other people and what I can do, I'm here today to take care of somebody else. That's transformative in terms of identity, in terms of purpose, in terms of why I bounce out of bed in the morning. And I was talking to this young man again, and I said, I don't, because of the calling God's put in my life, I don't remember a day when I didn't wake up to an alarm clock, when I didn't wake up with something that had to be done and needed to be done and was an opportunity, and that my day wasn't directed that way. And he said, and he even commented, he said, that's radically different than the life that I came from.
Right.
Because we just rolled out whenever with no real idea of what we're going to do, and we kind of just gratified ourselves until we crashed again and then started all over again the next day.
And the irony is that seems like that's freedom.
Right.
And I think when our residents, when those struggling with substance abuse recognize that there's no freedom in that, and that's really bondage. It's that war that's going on between the the seen and the unseen. And I guess us here in this ministry giving some outlets for them to experience what a life of service, how that really is freeing. And even though, yes, there's a time commitment and there's an energy commitment, but that is not bondage. That is something that's such a blessing. Then you realize, oh, the purpose is the freedom instead of being devoid of any responsibility and then, end up suffering what we do to ourselves. And so I've seen that light go on, and it's great to hear. I know who you're talking about in the conversation you had, and he's such an inspiring his journey in the last 9 months, and so we have such high hopes for where he's going, and I would love to see him be able to continue in this. And I love also how you're bringing up that you can't always sit down, and as an organization you can't pre-plan where everyone's going to plug in. And and that's part of community also. And going back to 1 Corinthians 12, it is interesting that Paul's longest, teaching about the church and about is a body metaphor. It's organic, and it's not corporate in the sense that we think of corporate, an organizational corporation. Some of that has to take place, of course. But, seeing people for their value and worth, and then how they plug in and grow your organization is fantastic.
It's been a beautiful picture to be able to watch, from the inception of his way to where we are today, because so many guys have found their purpose in recovery and ministry here. And I talked to a guy yesterday and talked to a guy today who both, interestingly, totally disconnected from each other, were reflecting over the first time they drove down Shields Road and turned into this property and where they were at, and then reflecting back, however many years it's been since then, and think about how many times they've made that trip and how that trip's been completely different today than it was that first day when they were scared. They had no idea, certainly no dream that they would one day be, this would become their profession, or this would become their, path of service and devotion. They were simply trying to, escape a jail sentence or, find a place to live right now to get a fresh start on life. So it's just so neat to see guys really discover those services. And most of our, like I said, most of our staff, most of our residential staff are guys who just went through the program and developed a heart for it and stayed here and were engaged and found ways that they could serve. We have seldom ever said, okay, here's our job descriptions for the year. These are the roles we need to fill. These are the strategies we have. It's just been kind of a morphing of things and a growing of things. In fact, I have a guy that's getting ready to graduate this Sunday after a year who's been here a number of times. And for some time, he's been saying, hey, I want to be on staff. I want to be on staff. I'm on staff. And we're like, well, first you need to just have some sobriety. You just need to complete the program and that kind of thing. And he was having a hard time with that and maintaining his sobriety. But he really wanted to be part of the staff here. And I said, instead of trying to force yourself in, just serve. Just make yourself available. And interestingly, at just the right time, there became a house manager opportunity. And for the first time, he now has found himself with a role here and finding great satisfaction and being very successful at it. But, back when he said, I want a job here, I want a job here, he would have not been ready for it. But letting God's timing and God's, work and kind of work on him in such a way. And then God opens a door. He places everyone exactly where he intends. And then there becomes that perfect house manager job that this guy can step into. And as he's been doing, do well. And my guess will be that will, go to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And there'll be more and more opportunities. So that's been the exciting thing that I've seen in so many of these guys' lives, just developing in that heart of service and really seeing the transformation. Because to me, you're not truly sober until, one, you're fit into God's purpose and you're really devoted outside yourself. As long as you're self-serving, you'll always have an addiction of some kind. But if you're other-serving and you're God-focused, that is fundamentally what sobriety is going to look like.
Yeah, and that's going back, it's not just that it's a command. It's not even the right way. The command is, I think, that shows up through Scripture is about this restoration. Don't you know that you need to be about service? Because that's what you're intended to be. Right. It becomes no, this is actually the best version of you is going to be one that is serving others.
Right.
We have the program MRT that we've brought up a few times, and this is, not strictly does not come from biblical, passages like some of the other programs that we do, are based on that. But it's interesting to me that the progression in the MRT ladder from, complete denial and dishonesty, but through the progression gets to what they call normal. And, what these psychologists and sociologists that develop this, that normal is you're aware of the social things around you and others, that you have a genuine concern for other people, and that you have a healthy identity and a set of goals that reaches out to them, because that's what we're built for. Mm-hmm. And so really when we ask guys to, take time away to put the energy here, to cut the grass in the afternoon, during your first 30 days, or go serve at one of our thrift stores as a volunteer and not get payments part of the program, now they have to wrestle with, wait a minute, I'm not, I'm supposed to get paid for this, right? Or am I supposed to get paid? Or, why am I doing this? And it's like those, I think, that embrace that and say, oh, I've been asked to work, I'm going to go work, and I'm doing this without any immediate benefit to myself, or probably have a mindset that's going to help them going forward. And I hope we create that in all of our guys, but I know it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, is happening right now is, of course, a couple of weeks ago we had the hurricane hit down in the Gulf and do a lot of damage, obviously down in Louisiana and Alabama and the whole Gulf area. And so there's a group, getting together, to do some relief efforts down there. And a number of our guys have asked whether they can participate, whether I can be a part of it. And it's surprising a little bit, because a lot of these guys have some pretty, challenging financial situations. And so they're usually like, every spare minute, can I work some, can I make some more money, can I make some more money? And these guys are forfeiting, they're going to take time off work. Yeah. So they're going to lose income to go down for 4 or 5 days and help serve, with the hurricane relief efforts that are going on in the Gulf. And to me, that's that paradigm shift. Right. Where I'm going to not only go at my expense, we're not paying for the trip, they have to pay for their trip down there. They're going to take time out of their schedule, and they're also going to lose income in order to be a part of service. And to me, that's the kind of thing that I see in these guys, that when they start really grasping the restoration that Jesus is really trying to bring about in their lives.
Yeah, and it's not that they never had the capacity for that, because I think our faith statement is we all have the capacity to be. So that's what we're built for. Mm-hmm. It's that where they were with their identity and their purpose, and only being able to see the addiction and just struggling through those physical set of needs that they had, and certainly the spiritual needs. And until you have some foundation there and an understanding of who you really are, what God has made you for, and I think the stability of being a part of a program like this, then they realize that they can think sacrificially in a way that probably they couldn't before. So we have a number of great stories like that around here. As you said, most of our staff, I don't want to tell this full story. I just want to tell, because I want to we want to interview this individual at some point soon. And that's our resident director, Daryl. And I know he tells the story after coming through the program that he was ready to move on to other things. And you came to him, and I believe Jeremy, about the same time, because you realized that the program was growing and you needed some extra help because you were doing so much just on your own, and that you asked him if he would consider coming on, the staff. And I know what he's told me is that he said, I fully intended to tell Tom no. But when he sat down with you, he said, the Spirit made me say yes, and he couldn't believe it. But his heart was in such a place, and that's borne itself out over the last 8, 9, 10 years. I don't know exactly how long he's been working here now, and what a servant heart he has. And so it takes you into places you didn't think you'd be, and here he is, and what a blessing he's been because his heart was transformed to be a service. Absolutely. So I want to recognize here, as we kind of get maybe to the end of this, that over the past week we've had a great tragedy on campus with a young man who, oddly enough, sat in this very seat a few months ago as the second podcast interview, which I'll link in the description to this for those that want to watch it, Mr. Jon Brown. And even though he has lost his life here in the last week, there's still a great story that coincides here with service. You want to share some of that?
Sure. Jon was associated with this program for a long time, even though he had only come into the program. He came in 3 times for relatively short stays, but he had been associated through his family and through relationships for a long time, was very familiar with our program, had a lot of relationships with guys, so he was very aware and very kind of a part of it, but was struggling with opiate addiction for a long time. The last time he came to the program, when we interviewed him and stuff, he had made some dramatic changes. Prior to that, he'd always come in here very oppositional, very defiant, very, atheistic, antagonistic toward God, all those kind of things.
Very bare minimum, trying to kind of cut corners.
Right. And admittedly said he spent most of his time trying to figure out how to beat the system instead of allow the system to transform him. Yeah. This last time he came in and really took the faith seriously, really had a dramatic change for some reasons. And so, Daryl, that you mentioned, baptized him into Christ back at the 1st of June. And he began making some very dramatic changes in his life. Unbelievable changes. And he was quickly, sharing, studying with other people, serving around here, doing whatever it took, sharing the gospel with people, leading Bible studies, baptized a number of guys, shared the gospel with a number of guys, to the point that some 7 guys are now Christians today because of his influence in some way. And then, unfortunately, just a week ago today, about this time, we found out that he had lost his life. And as much as that seems terrible and seems premature, you see somehow that God's working a purpose in it, because he took that short period of 3 months or so of ministry and has used it to transform 7 guys' lives. And as you and I talked, most Christians won't do that within their lifetime, and yet he did that within 3 months of his life. He became known around here as John the Baptist because of the number of guys who've been baptized by him. And those guys now are living out that legacy. In fact, the young man I was talking to you earlier about, we were discussing last night that John had kind of invited him as kind of his co-teacher to help lead some of these Bible studies that they were doing in the evenings on their own voluntarily. And those had kind of dwindled down, obviously, with the things that have happened recently. And this young man said, "Hey, I'm going to step it back up. I want to continue to honor John and obviously the purpose that God's given us by continuing these Bible studies and continuing this influence and continuing to sow the seeds of the gospel in these guys' lives, because the effectiveness of a resident doing that is far higher than a staff member, a guy like me. When they see their peers, they're doing that and they're hearing from one another and speaking their own language, the impact of that is just manifold, more powerful, more effective. So it's exciting to see that and to see that service continue. And I have told John's family, that no one knows, but I certainly anticipate that John's legacy of such a short, really, window of time truly will be an eternal one in the lives of many. In fact, at his funeral, a number of the guys stood up at the funeral and just said, "Hey, John baptized me, John shared the gospel with me," those kind of things. And so this family knew that their son had made an eternal difference in the lives of so many. And that's the ultimate service that matters. You can cut the grass, you can do all those things, which are wonderful, but ultimately making an eternal spiritual difference in the lives of people is the thing that ultimately is going to matter.
And you say this all the time for our ministry as a whole, that all we can do is to plant a seed.
Right.
And whether that's over a 1-year period, a 9-month period, a 9-week period, or a 1-day period.
Right.
And so John certainly was planting seeds and stepping up to meet needs. And that's the call for us. And I know that's the call here at His Way. And I hope for those that are watching and listening that they'll find a way to plant seeds in their sphere of influence. And again, going back to why we were created, to have dominion over, to have maintenance over, to be a manager over, part of God's kingdom. And so what He has placed you, where He has placed you, and the time He has placed you, to just sow his good seed, and you don't know what's going to happen down the road. He's going to water it, though. He's going to give some increase, and eternal things will happen for his glory.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for sitting down with us again, Tom.
It's good to be with you, Stuart.
And thank you guys for joining us. And if you have any questions or would like any more information about His Way, I invite you to go to our website at hiswayinc.org.